Hey everyone, welcome back to video 2. So we're going to be jumping into a couple of exercises in this video. And to kick things off here, we're going to be looking at the EQ. So just make sure you have your EQ, week 7 EQ exercise open. Now these are going to be quite similar to the reverb and delay ones that we did, in that we've got the original sound here at the beginning. So here I've got my original kick, and then kick 1 and 2. And then I got my original snare and snare 1 and 2. So the aim of the game here is that we're going to try and copy the sound of the other two kicks and the other two snares with just using the EQ. So let's listen to what we've got here. So it's just a normal kick, one of the ones from the factory packs. And I've just got an EQ on here, which is not doing anything at the moment. So nothing's been turned up or down. It's just a flat EQ. So it's not affecting the sound at all. So let's start off here. We've got our original kick. So we're going to tweak this to make it sound like the other two here. So let's listen to kick 1. Okay. I'm just flicking between the two now, so original 1 and kick 1. Now I'm not going to say too much about it, but it does sound like there's a little more oomph in the original, so it's missing a bit of that meatiness in kick 1. So I'm not going to say too much. We're going to do the same thing here where we have the countdown timer on screen, and I'm going to get you guys to pause it. Then you are going to change your EQ to make it sound like kick 1. And then as usual, once you unpause, we'll have a look. I'll do it on my end as well. And then we'll see how close we actually got to the EQ that was on there. So when you're pulling these things up and down to try and make it sound like kick 1, remember, you can pull them up and down. Any of these four filters here. I didn't use more than 4, so just keep it standard. So just use the 4. Don't add any more. You don't need to add any more. Make sure you only got the 4 there, and you can also change the filter mode for each of these EQs. So if you want to use a cutoff, you can do that, like we learnt with the auto filter as well. And then on this end here, you can use a cutoff that goes the other way. That's a low pass. So you can do that on either end. You can move the frequency up and down. You can move these up and down. And then once you get something there, you can move the middle ones, tweak it even more. So yeah, what I suggest you do to start off with is just play around with these little dots, move them around, and see what actually happens to the sound. That way you can make a connection between what you're hearing and what you're doing on the screen with the EQ. So if you don't know much about frequencies, this is going to be the way to learn. So just mess around, pull the EQs up and down, use a cutoff filter on each end, just see how that affects the sound. So obviously if it's up here, I'm cutting out all that sub, or the low end. And if I pull it up here, now I'm hearing a lot of top end. By top end, I mean, anything above 5, 6, 7,000 hertz. If you want to see it in more detail, we can open this, so don't forget to do that. If you move your mouse along the frequency range here, if you look at the bottom left, which I'll circle, you can see you have the kilohertz there, and then if you move down, you have hertz. So you can actually see what the exact number is for where your mouse currently is positioned. So if I'm moving this around, I can have a look down there and see, all right, now I'm at around 5K. So yeah, for this exercise, please do make sure you're using decent speakers or headphones, something where you can actually hear all the frequencies. Because if I try to do this on like I'm using a MacBook, so if I tried to do it straight out of my MacBook speakers, it'd be almost impossible to tell what frequencies what, especially down here, because you're just not going to hear bass from those small speakers. Yeah, what I suggest you do is just move these around at different numbers. That way you can hear what it actually sounds like. So you can hear what a 5K boost sounds like by pulling this up. And then you can hear what a, let's say, what 100 Hertz boost sounds like. And if you take it away, just, yeah, move this around like Play-Doh. Just shift it around. You know, just experiment with what you're doing on the screen and what you're actually hearing and how it's affecting the sound. So you might want to play around with the EQ a little bit first, but what I'll do is I'll get you to pause it here anyway. Feel free to, obviously you can take, since it's a video, you can just take as long as you like. So pause the video, play around with it for a bit, and then once you're ready, try and match kick 1. So yeah, I'm not going to say too much about what's happening kick 1. I'll let you pause the video here. You can move the EQ around to try and get something close. And then we'll see you when you return. Okay, how did you go with that one? So yeah, hopefully you had a little play around with the EQ and managed to try and maybe come up with something that was sounded a little bit close. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's very hard with the EQ. It's actually probably going to be impossible to get it absolutely perfect frequency-wise and gain-wise. But what I'm really looking for is that at the end of the day, we have a similar shape EQ to what's actually happening. So don't worry about the numbers too much. I just want to see the same shape as what's happening in the actual sound. So I'm just going to delete this and put on a fresh EQ. I was messing around with it before. Okay, so that's the original sound. Now let's listen to kick 1. So I didn't say too much about it before we paused it, because I wanted you to try and figure out as much as you could on your own. But obviously it sounds like there's a lot of meatiness that's disappeared in this one. And what I mean by meatiness is that oomph, that bass. So that's probably going to mean that a lot of the bass has been cut out. So I'm going to start here and I'm just going to cut out the bass. The way I'm going to do that is just to turn filter 1 into a high pass, low cut. And I'm just going to move this up a bit. Okay, now let's listen to the difference. So it's getting closer, but it sounds like there's a bit of an extra sparkle in this one, a bit of extra top end. Just a little bit harsher. So I'm going to push up the top end on ours. And because I'm doing that, because I'm increasing the volume, it is getting louder, so I have to bring the volume down just a touch to make sure we're not clipping. So it's getting close. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that. It's pretty close. So let's actually have a look at what the EQ looks like on kick 1. Okay, this is the EQ curve for kick 1. So you can see that it's pretty similar to what I had. So if I click on mine, click back on kick 1, that curve shape is quite similar. So I'll leave it on kick 1. So what was happening was there was a cutoff here, which was set around 200 Hertz. So the actual cutoff happened at around 100. So the curve should look like this, like a little step up and then another step up. So like I predicted, there was that boost at the top end. So this one here is around the 4K, 5K mark. And then it just boosts everything up above that because it's a high shelf. And then pretty flat in the middle. But yeah, just those two step ups. So hopefully your shape was something similar to that. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. Even if you couldn't pick out, let's say you just had the cutoff, I'm happy with that as well. So, but if you didn't manage to get it, don't worry too much. This is the first time we've ever looked at EQ or frequencies. So yeah, don't be too hard on yourself if you couldn't get that one. We got a few more chances anyway to make up for it. Okay, so we've done kick 1. I've just reset my EQ curve here on the original kick by just deleting the EQ and putting another EQ8 on. So you can either do that or you can tweak the one you got, doesn't matter too much. But now we're going to have a look at kick 2. So I'm just going to listen to it. Listen to the original first. And I'll solo kick 2. Click between the two. Okay, I'm not going to say too much about it. Once again, pause the video here. Try and get your EQ close to what's happening in kick 2. And then we'll come back and see how you did. With this one here, if you're not on decent headphones or you don't have monitors or speakers or you're using smaller speakers, it is going to be a lot harder for you to hear. So that's why I was saying at the beginning of the video to make sure you try and use something where you can hear all the frequencies. Unfortunately, it's one of those cases where most of the time, the better the equipment, the better you're going to hear all the frequencies represented in a natural way. If you're using something like Beats by Dre, for example, those headphones accent the bass and the treble a lot, and they have a bit of a dip in the mids. And I do that because that's what's pleasant to listen to for most people. So they actually add a bit of an EQ curve onto the headphones themselves, like built in. Whereas headphones that are geared more towards music producers and they're a little more, I guess, higher end, let's say brands like Beyerdynamic and Sennheiser, even AKG, even Audio-Technica, quite good as well. Most of those brands make reference or studio monitor headphones, and they use a flat EQ, or as close to flat as possible EQ curve, so that whatever you're hearing through the headphones is exactly what's happening with the sound, instead of the headphones doing its own little thing and adding all sorts of EQ curves to the sound to try and make it sound better for you. What the higher end studio monitors do is just give you as flat as possible response curve. So I'm using Beyerdynamics at the moment. While they actually might not sound as appealing to the average listener, let's say you're listening to music just for pleasure, just sitting back and listening to music, the Beats by Dre would probably sound better to most people because they are accenting the bass and treble. Whereas headphones like Beyerdynamics, they give you more flat response. So you're not going to get all those accents. But at the end of the day, a flat response curve means you're going to get an accurate representation of the sound. So just keep that in mind, that your speakers and headphones do matter when it comes to EQs. So once you get to the mixing stage, in a couple of weeks we'll be getting onto that. It's going to be very hard if you're, especially, close to impossible if you're just listening through your laptop speakers. But if you're not on decent headphones or you don't have studio monitors, that stage is going to be a little trickier. So yeah, if it is possible for you, I do suggest investing in some decent headphones at least. If you don't have the space or money for studio monitors just yet. But yeah, enough on that, enough on the headphones. Let's jump into kick 2. So sounds like there's a lot more bottom end in this one, and there's next to no top end. So I'm guessing, let's jump back to the original kick, that there is a low pass filter on one of these. I'm just going to put it on number 4. So that's the opposite of this curve here. Unfortunately, it's cut off at the bottom. But it's the opposite of this curve, so it goes that way. And you'll see it once I click it anyway. So that's a low pass filter. Now, kick 2 is what we want. Quite a lot of the highs have been cut out, so it's pretty aggressive low pass. So I'm going to bring this down. I'm just going to use the frequency here. I've got .4 selected. Okay. Getting closer now. But it does sound like there's a boost on this one somewhere. So to try and find that boost, I'm just going to grab one of these dots. I'm just going to pull it right up. And I'm going to move it around. And then bring it down. Let's actually have a look at the curve and see how close we got. Alright, so this was the curve for kick 2. So hopefully your curve was somewhere similar, as in you had it cut off around this range. So let's look at ours. So I had mine cut off, yeah, pretty close to where this one was cut off. Now one thing that was different was I had the boost there for, where was it, like 100 or 70-ish hertz. But this one just had a shelf instead of an actual boost. So it was just a low shelf on that one. But that would have been next to impossible for me to hear because I am on headphones at the moment. And I think these go down to maybe 20 or 30 hertz, but it is very hard to hear the difference on headphones. Whereas if you're on studio monitors with a subwoofer, you pretty much need a subwoofer to hear anything under, you know, this in this kind of range. Anything under 40 to 50-ish, you're going to need a sub. And then even then, frequencies down here are just not needed or audible, like anything under 10. So if you don't have a subwoofer, that would be hard to tell. Long as you got that cutoff right, that's all that really matters. Cutoff and a little boost around this mark here. Okay, so that was kick 2. It was kind of the opposite of kick 1. Now we're going to look at these snares. So to play these snares, because I've got all the kicks on the first scene here, number 1, I'm going to have to play scene 2. So I'll just hit play on this. Now I've got our snares. So I wanted to do a couple of different sounds because different sounds are going to have very different frequency ranges. So a kick is going to be much different to a snare. Snare is not going to have that bottom end, whereas a kick's going to be mostly bottom end with a little bit of top end. I have included a little frequency guide. It's just a little PDF to show you what kind of sound would sit in what frequency range. So just make sure you download that as well, because that does help. And that was in this week's files. Okay, so let's look at this snare. So we've got this original snare here. So just looking at this curve, the main meat of the sound seems to be around the middle here, which is the case with most snares. And then a little sheen up the top end as well. Alright, so that's the snare, original snare. Let's look at snare 1. Now these ones are going to be a little trickier because we don't have that bass to work with. I'm not going to say too much about it. Let's pause the video here. See what you can do with the snare. These are going to be harder, like I said, but have a go and then see you when you return. Alright, let's go through snare 1. This snare sounds much brighter than ours. Possibly some low end cut as well, so I'm going to try that. Try a few things and see how we go. Let's just try and cut out the low end here. Probably actually listen to the right one first. Okay, I'm going to add a bit of top end as well to that. It sounds much brighter in this one. Okay, it's something like that, I'm pretty sure. Sounding pretty close there. There's just something missing in ours. Okay, let's try that curve. So it's something like little peak here, dips back down, and then back up to the top for the top end. So let's look at the curve for snare 1. Okay, this is snare 1's curve. I'll open up here to make it bigger. So there was a cutoff, and then there was a peak at 180 hertz. So it was like a little mountain at the start, which then dipped all the way back down around the 400, 300, 400 mark. And then just slowly rose up towards the end there and peaked at around 10, 11K. So the curve was like that. Let's look at ours. Okay, so pretty similar. I knew there was a little peak there somewhere, I just couldn't exactly find it at the time. But those are the two curves. So how did you go with that one? Were you close? Were you far? Like I said, EQ is a very, very complex thing, and it takes time for your ears to be in tune with all the frequencies. So yeah, this is your first go at doing it. Don't be too hard on yourself. The more you produce music and listen to frequencies, the more you'll be able to pick them out. If you did manage to get it, amazing work. So yeah, that was snare 1. I'm going to delete this EQ and start with another one. Now let's look at snare 2. That's our original. Okay, snare 2 sounding quite funky. Likewise, let's pause the video here. You can either bring in new EQ or use the one you got, doesn't matter too much. And then fiddle around with it. You might have to play around with the frequencies a little more just to listen to try and hear what's actually going on in snare 2. And then we'll come back and see how you did. Snare 2 is a little bit trickier. It's probably one of the trickiest ones. But let's see what we can do here live. Well, kind of live. Live for me anyway. Straight off, I'm hearing that the top end has been choked a bit. And there's a peak. I can hear a very specific tone that's jumping out at me. So I'll just have to find where exactly that is. You can hear it almost sounds like a tom now because of the way that EQ curve has been pushed. So let's see if we can mimic this. First of all, I'm going to get rid of that top end. So let's just try a low pass. A little bit more. Too much. Something like that. So I've got the cutoff somewhere around there. There's a frequency jumping out at me. So we have to find that. Easiest way to do that is just to pull up one of these dots all the way to the top and then move this up and down as we listen to the sound. So let's listen to the snare again. All right. So you can hear it's definitely not here. As I move it down, I'm just going to open this up. All right, that's pretty close. Might just try a high shelf there. Nah, definitely cut off, undo that. So to undo, pretty sure I covered this. If not, it is Command Z or Control Z. Like it's the same undo for pretty much any program in Windows or Mac. You use Command Z or Control Z, and that will undo your last action, and you can keep undoing quite a way back. So if you really mess something up, you can just keep hitting Command Z or Control Z, and it will bring you back to where you were. Sometimes if you save a file and then try and undo it, that won't work because you've already kind of written it in memory. So it just depends on the program, but yeah, that's why I was saying at the start I like to version up my projects so that if I really mess something up, I can just go back to a previous version. Moving along though. Sounds like there's a little more top end, so I'll just add it a little bit there. So I'll just move it up a bit. It's kind of sitting around, what is it, 320-ish. Okay, I'm not going to fiddle with it too much to try and get it perfect. It's something like that, I'm pretty sure. So I didn't mess around with the bottom end. I'm not sure what's going on with that. I don't think there's too much going on. It's harder to hear with a snare anyway. But there's definitely a peak here around this mark, around 300-ish mark. And then there's definitely a cutoff. So I know those two things. All right, let's see how close our curve is to what was happening in snare 2. Okay, this was the curve for snare 2. So yeah, nothing happened with the bottom end. There was a peak. Let's open this up. There was a peak at 300. It was pretty much, yeah, 300. And then there's just a low pass or high cut filter there on the third dot. Doesn't matter which dot you use. And that was around 3K, which then fell off at around 7,000. So again, don't worry about numbers too much. I'm just mentioning those for accuracy reasons, but all I care about is the curve shape. So let's have a look at our original. I'll open this up. And I'll flick between the two here. And yeah, you can see it's quite similar. I thought there was a little dip there for some reason, but there wasn't. And then there was just that cutoff at the top. So hopefully you got somewhere in the vicinity of this kind of a curve. The way to find that frequency, like I showed just then, is to just push it up all the way, move it up and down, and then you can try and pinpoint where that same tone is happening. Because there was that very strong tone there that was jumping out, which is why I did that. And then you can also hear that there's no top end. So if we put this back to like a bell, we get all our top end back. If I undo that, we sort of dull it down a little bit. So hopefully you can hear that. But yeah, this is our first look at the EQ and using the EQ. And this kind of a thing really takes a lot of training, like ear training, frequency training, to hear where all those frequencies are happening. You know, there's no way I could have done this when I was starting, that's for sure. Or, you know, done it as quickly. But over time, you'll gain more experience. You'll start to hear those sounds and frequencies, and then you'll be able to pick those out. And it's really going to help you when we get to the later stages of helping your track gel together, because a lot of sounds are going to be competing for the same space. So you want to make sure that you have enough space for all those sounds. Speaking in a non-technical sense, you can use this creatively as well. So you can see the character is much different from snare 2. So if I delete this EQ here, that was our original snare. You can mess around with the EQ to get different sounds from the same sound, if that makes sense. So these are all completely different snares, but they're the same snare. So the same snare sample, but we've just used an EQ to change the sound of each one. So if there's something specific about a sound you don't like, feel free to play around with the EQ to try and, you know, manipulate it to something that sounds closer to what you want. Same with the kicks here. They all sound completely different. So if you wanted a subbier kick but didn't like the top end of something, you can just do what we did to kick 2, and that was just get rid of all that top end. Now you've got a subby bass, a subby kick. So yes, the EQ is going to be something that you're going to see a lot of. You're going to be using it in every single project, almost guaranteed, and almost every single track as well. Whether it be a MIDI track, audio track, doesn't matter. Most of your sounds are going to need some kind of manipulating in one way, just to make them work. But that was the EQ exercise. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something from it. What we're going to do now is look at an audio filter exercise.